everyone, welcome to the January 6th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and this week we're taking a look ahead to Saturday's card at Oaklawn Park, handicapping the late pick 5 sequence there, races 5 through 9. The feature race is race 8, the Pippin Stakes for the older fillies and mares, going the 2-turn route distance. And Craig, this is a pretty difficult card. I was looking through those different fields and venues on Saturday, trying to find something that would be interesting to talk about. I definitely think Oaklawn has put together the most interesting late pick 5 sequence, but it's not easy to put together a ticket.
No, I may have used your name in vain a few times. That is until you gave out a nice winner at Aqueduct earlier today, so I took it all back. But yeah, by no means this is a very difficult sequence if you ask me, but I do think that they all have some interest to me. It's more likely I will be playing vertical in these races than horizontal, but we can talk about that more as we go on. I do think it's a nice slate. And this early opening at Oaklawn has proved really nice because the fields have been big.
Yeah, they've had a really nice racing product at Oaklawn through the first few weeks. Had some luck there on the forecast when you were not on, Craig, back in December. So hopefully we can recreate some of that magic here. It's a sequence that has a lot of large fields, some very competitive races, some perplexing morning lines that I think we'll get into. It's one where you kind of have to figure out for yourself where you think the money is going to go, because that's important when you craft these tickets to know which horses are going to be the favorites and you might want to take a stand against or go with. So we'll try to dissect all of that. Craig, I should mention before we get into the racing, there is some wet weather predicted all around the country this weekend. And one of the reasons I wanted to pick Oaklawn was because it's all dirt racing. You're not going to have races transferred from one surface to another, but there is rain predicted in the Hot Springs area for the afternoon on Saturday. So these races might come up sloppy or wet. We'll see how that all turns out, but they will stay on the surface that they're carded for, being at Oaklawn. Craig, let's start things off with race 5. It's a starter allowance, 10,000 horses that have raced for that claiming tag recently, going the 2-turn mile on the main track. And this is one that is very wide open. I don't disagree with the morning line favorite here, the number 1, Mr. Dougie Fresh. It seems like a pretty competitive field, but one that I do think will take some money here, going out first off the claim for Robertino Diodoro. He is obviously always dangerous in these situations.
He is. It's a race with a big field of 11. It's got a fast pace flag on our pace projector. And I found the condition of this race really interesting. It's your traditional starter allowance for horses that have started for, I think it was 10,000 or less. But what's unique about it is it's only in the last 2 starts. Sometimes these things go back 6 months or a year, even 2 years. But I don't think I've ever seen one where it's only 2 starts. So it was in the condition book, and I think a lot of horses in here were probably selected and claimed and pointed to this race specifically, as opposed to some of your more traditional starter allowances.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. You do have some runners with plenty of back class in here. One of them is Mr. Dougie Fresh, Blue Ridge Traveler, a horse that's been competing in stakes races in the distant past. But all of those horses that you mentioned, as you alluded to, they are coming off races against cheaper claiming companies. So that obviously is a condition for this race. I do like that you brought up the pace, Craig, because I think that's a really important place to start. You've got a couple of contenders that are shown towards the front end on the pace projector, the number 8 Home Run Trick and the number 9 Inclander. And it just seems like these two are going to have to hook up in the early going, because they are both horses that seem like they need the lead to be most successful. And I think that's going to be most detrimental to Home Run Trick, who seems like a strong contender, but I worry about the trip for him.
Yeah, I do. I don't disagree with the pace projector at all. And it also worries me for a horse like the favorite on the morning line we talked about, Mr. Dougie Fresh. He's a horse who's done his best running on the front end when he gets in these route races. He's kind of a conundrum for me. When you look at his record, he has a very good record routing. He's 7 for 39 overall, but he's 5 for 18 in these routes where he's only 2 for 21 sprinting. Makes you kind of wonder what the connections are doing in sprinting him so often. He's obviously changed hands a few times, so it's not all the same people making this decision, but I worry about him being down on the rail, and he's a horse that I'm going to play against in this spot. It's probably not the smartest thing to do, and it's one that would scare me in horizontals not to use him. If I did wind up playing a pick 5, I would probably watch the windows, but he's not the kind of horse I want to take a short price in, given the pace and given some other questions with him.
Yeah, he's definitely a horse that I think you do have to have an opinion about. I understand you taking a slightly negative view. He clearly is not the horse that he once was when he was back in Jason Service's barn, but the last effort was okay. And Robertino Diodoro, I'm always scared of these horses because he has just these awesome stats first off the claim, especially in dirt routes, and especially in dirt routes at Oaklawn Park. I wrote down the stats over the past 5 years in that situation. He's 24 for 93, 26%, with an ROI that's over $3. These horses don't always take that much money. Now, this one might because he's got some solid recent form, and we'll see how the trip works out. I think it's a good point about him maybe being a little bit closer to the pace than you otherwise would want to see him coming out of those sprint races, but I do think he's a contender here, though this is such a wide open race. He's not a contender that I would necessarily want to default to. The horse that I would say interested me most here, Craig, that I would say that I have some faith in is the number 7 Heirloom Kitten. He was claimed for $8,000 last time out, so fits the condition. This trainer, William Martin, does pretty well off the claim at Oaklawn over the past 5 years. Not a ton of starters, just 26 runners, but he's won with 5 of them, an ROI that's nearing $3, so that's a positive sign. And he's just one that has relatively consistent form in a race where a few of the others are all over the place. He has dropped in class recently. He's another one that was coming out of some higher level races last year, but it seems like he's held his speed figures pretty steady, and he's not a horse that needs the lead, though he will be close to the pace. He's definitely one that I would want to lean on in this first leg, having some other coverage as backups.
Yeah, he's definitely one that I'm going to be using. He was one of those I was talking about. It looks like he was claimed specifically for this spot. I mean, you could maybe even say the same about Mr. Dougie Fresh as he gets shipped in from California for this spot as well. And another one that interested me too was on the far outside, Carl G for Norm McKnight. Now that one's not a claim, but it's a barn change. But he's a horse who hasn't been on the dirt since his very first career start. He didn't run terribly that day. He's been on nothing but turf and synthetic, which obviously are your only options when you're at Woodbine. But Norm McKnight does do good with these first-time acquisitions, and he's one that I think is going to be a price. Not a fan of the posts that he draws, but I do think he's going to offer some value.
Yeah, another horse that I want to mention and kind of get your take on, Craig, is a horse that's listed at 20-1 on the morning line, the number 6 Pasamonte Man, and he's coming in from Remington Park, and I think you probably better handle on this than I do, but I feel like a lot of times that Remington form, even if it looks like it's maybe on par from a claiming tag or allowance level standpoint, maybe slightly inferior to what he's facing at Oaklawn Park, but the speed figures are okay, and he just seems like he's been pretty consistent lately. A really hard-trying horse. He knows how to win races, and he's picking up Ricardo Santana for these connections that I'm not too familiar with, trainer Shea Stewart coming in from Remington. So just some interesting things on a horse that could be a price in this race. I don't think he'll be 20-1, but if he's somewhere around 10-1, he's the kind of horse that I would want to include.
Yeah, now admittedly, I haven't followed as much in years past because I've been on vacation and this is a new time of year for Oaklawn to be running. But in years prior, Remington horses have really done well shipping into Oaklawn. Now, part of that may be that they had a fitness edge, as normally the meet would close just before Christmas, just as it did this year. And those horses were fresh, where a lot of horses coming into the Oaklawn meet hadn't run in a few months. So, while it could be different this year, I certainly wouldn't dismiss him based on the just coming from Remington, because the horses have done fine there. I will have to look back and see how it's gone in the first few weeks of the meet this year. But Shea Stewart does a good job with his horses here, and I would imagine this one will be ready to go.
Yeah, I would say, because we've covered a lot of horses, for me, I would be looking most towards the number 7 Heirloom Kitten and Mr. Dougie Fresh, and Pasamonte Man would be more of like a B or a C type for me, and those are the ones I'm most interested in. Taking a slight stand against Home Run Trick, who I do feel like is going to take more money than that 5-1 morning line off that victory at the level last time, but just feel like he's going to have that difficult pace situation to deal with.
Yeah, the one other horse I would mention is a 10 Exemplar. If this race were to get really hot up front and fall apart, he's a horse that I think will definitely be closing. It looks like he was also claimed with these starter allowances in mind. He's already running one just about 2 weeks ago, just before Christmas. Has figures that fit, so he's one I will be using as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of viewed him more as a pick up the pieces type, but this might be the kind of race where you keep picking up the pieces until you land in the winner's circle. So we'll see what we get from the 10-year-old exemplar. Craig, things don't get too much easier as we move into the next leg of this sequence, race 6, an Arkansas-bred optional claiming allowance event for the fillies going 6 furlongs. And hard to know where to start in this one. You got a couple of short prices drawn towards the center of the field with the number 5, Connie K, and the number 6, Heated Argument. Heated Argument has a ton of early speed. She's shown on the lead in the pace projector, but there are some others who want to be forwardly placed as well. I just wonder if she's the kind of horse that's going to run them all off their feet.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I'm not going to dismiss her by any means, but I do think the two horses that you focused on are probably the two best horses on form in the looking at the form of the horses in Connie K and Heated Argument. But I do worry about that pace getting a little quick. As you said, Heated Argument's really quick. She runs a lot of red pace figures in TimeformUS PPs. Even when she doesn't make the lead, she's right up there pressing. And Connie K's the same way. So while they may not hook up real early, I would assume it's going to happen sooner rather than later, maybe midway on the turn. So there's a couple others I actually preferred in here, and they're both drawn a little bit to their outside. I like both the 8-horse Unbridled Twister and also the 9-horse Dolly Dimple. Dolly Dimple's one who's coming out for the Brad Cox barn, coming off of a long layoff. I think it's been about 9 months. She had a decent figure when she broke her maiden. Any improvement off that makes her a player in here. I think she'll get the right trip with that outside post. She's not a need-to-lead type, so I'm going to use her. But if I had to make a top pick in here, it would actually be the 8-horse Unbridled Twister. I really liked what I saw from her last time. She exploded to a career top, 14-point career top. Looked really good doing it. She gets a good post, and I just think things are going to set up more for these two than the two that figure to take the most money.
Yeah, I don't have an argument with either of those horses. The 8 and the 9, they figured to get the right kind of pace setup in this race. Like you, I'm a little skeptical of Heated Argument. All those red color-coded pace figures, sometimes it's the situation, sometimes it's the horse, and she just seems like one that wants to go fast every step of the way, and she often pays the price getting leg-weary at the end of her races. And, I mean, I don't want to be hard on the connections, but she's also being ridden by a jockey, Calvin Burrell, who just won 4 races last year from limited starters, so not exactly winning connections on her side for a horse that's listed as the morning line favorite. I'm just a little skeptical of her, of the short prices. I really do prefer Connie K, and in my view, Connie K is way the horse to beat in this race. She was good last year. She was a visually impressive debut winner at Oaklawn. They tried some tougher open company spots with her, whereas a lot of these have raced only against Arkansas-breds or primarily against Arkansas-breds. Connie K kept good company in Kentucky throughout the year. She upset a pretty good starter allowance field at Churchill last time with what I thought was a very game effort. She ran down an odds-on leader that day and held sway late to hold off a pretty good closer into Duplicitous, and off that performance, I think Connie K is going to be pretty tough if she's able to repeat it here. She's coming off about a 2-month layoff, but that's not a huge concern for trainer Randy Moore. So I like Connie K. She'd be a tentative lean for me in this race, but there is one other horse that I want to mention who's going to be a much bigger price, and that's the number 10, Miss Sassy Attitude. She's listed at 8-1 on the morning line. I could see her going off at 15-1. She just does not have a particularly appealing look to her, but there are a few things I like about this horse. I was watching her last race, won by Lady Astrid, which was another race for Arkansas-breds earlier in this Oaklawn Park meet, and that was a race where Heated Argument was part of the very fast pace that ultimately fell apart. And Miss Sassy Attitude had a lot of trouble at the start that day. She was bumped coming out of the gate, steadied early, all the way to the back of the pack. She was basically glued to the rail the entire way, encountered some traffic coming off the far turn. Just not an ideal trip for her. And for this race, she's getting a rider upgrade, and she's switching barns to a trainer that has had some success at Oaklawn in the past. And I know she doesn't have particularly appealing speed figures or anything like that, but I just think if you look through her form, you could make some excuses for her. 2 back, she was facing a much better horse, or a much better field of horses at Hawthorne. She was on turf and synthetic prior to that. Just a lot of excuses for a horse that might subtly be rounding into form, and she's going to get the right kind of trip from off the pace, but maybe not too far off the pace in here. So she's a long shot that I definitely want to throw into the mix, but this is one where if I had to lean on anybody, it would be Connie K.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that, and I want to thank you for throwing another horse I might have to use in here.
Yeah, the ticket just keeps getting more and more expensive. I feel your pain. Let's proceed on to another pretty complicated race. The middle leg of this sequence, race 7. It's a maiden claiming 40,000, going a mile and a 16th on the dirt course, and gosh, Craig, I'll just throw it to you because I don't know where to start. I mean, it's just a really confusing race, a lot of muddled forms, some maiden special weight droppers, but nobody that really sticks out as the horse to beat.
No, if I had to guess who I thought was going to be the favorite in here, I would probably actually differ from the morning line maker slightly and assume it's going to be the horse that draws inside Aristocat for Steve Asmussen. He ran in tougher class last time. Surfer Dude's done pretty well in much better competition. So maybe he's going to take the lean, but I don't particularly love him in here. He didn't take any money at all last time when he moved up to that maiden special weight. I wasn't impressed with his debut, and that told me something as well when he debuted in a maiden claimer. So I'm just not a big fan of his. His workout pattern's been really sketchy since his last race. He worked once, and then he took another week and a half to work. Maybe that was because of Christmas, but he just doesn't seem like a horse that is really being geared for a big stretch out. So at a short price, I'm not very interested in him. The horse that would interest me if he can draw into the field is the 13 El Potente. I don't want to spend too much time on him, but he's a horse who would have the best last race speed figure coming in. He ran an 85 that day. Most of the horses in here barely hit in the 70s. And more importantly, he actually dueled a really fast horse that day. The horse that finished just in front of him last time romped the next time out with a big figure. So he would be one that interested me quite a bit. Another one I'm going to have to use, especially if I play verticals, is the 4-horse Magoo. He showed really strong speed last time. I think it was a 130 early pace figure. We have it shown in red for sure before quitting badly. But if you go back and look in the charts and see the horse that he dueled with that day, he has 2 really big wins since, including a $100,000 allowance race where he won really easy for Brad Cox. So he wasn't dueling your typical maiden claimer that day. He was dueling a horse who is quite the serious runner. So I'm going to give him another shot. I'm not sure we're really going to get that 20-1 morning line that he is, but I think he's a really strong threat on the front end in here.
Well, it's the kind of race where you mentioned 3 horses that really weren't on my radar, so there are clearly many ways to go. One horse that you did mention, Craig, that I want to touch upon briefly is that 13 horse, who, you're correct, I mean, he's a major player if he draws into the race. I'm almost hoping that he doesn't because it makes things way more complicated, not only from the standpoint of having to use another horse, but he's a serious pace factor in the race with all of his early speed from that outside post position. So we'll see if he gets in. He's one that I think you have to use if there are enough scratches for him to get into the race. But yeah, you can make cases for a lot of these horses. I hope that you get your price on the number 4 horse. He's definitely the kind that I could throw into the mix on a backup ticket. You don't have to, have too strong of an argument to convince me in this race because there's nobody to be that afraid of. Like you, I'm not thrilled with the number 1 Aristocat. He's the kind of horse that I agree he could take a lot of money in this race, and I would want to veer away from him. He is coming out of a much tougher field, but yeah, I'm not seeing the strong signs pointing to him wanting to go this far. So I think there are much better options at better prices. I mean, a couple other horses that could take money are ones like the number 5, Looking for Excitement, who goes out for the Chris Hartman barn, who has cooled down a little bit. He was very hot through November and December. Seems like the barn has stopped winning at as high a rate as they were, but obviously he can still train some winners. He set a pretty moderate pace last time when he ran at this level, but put forth a respectable showing to be third. He's one that you could use. Another horse that I could see taking some money is the number 7, Pure Rocket, though he was claimed away from Brad Cox, so a lot of those performances that would make a major player in this race, you wonder if he's going to be able to reproduce them for the new barn, and a barn that has gone winless so far at this current Oaklawn Park meet, so maybe that's a bit of a negative with him. There are some bigger prices, though, that would interest me quite a bit that I would want to use as my keys in this sequence. One of those is the number 3, Full On. I always try to give a look to the lightly raced horses in these races, and he just has one start under his belt, and I think it's the kind of start that he can build on. Dwayne Lucas, these days, not a trainer that really cranks horses up to win their debuts. It looked like he just got an experience first time out, facing a much tougher maiden special weight field at Churchill Downs. He broke very slowly that day, was towards the back of the pack, just this big, goofy son of Union Rags that didn't look like he had much idea what he was doing for the first half of the race, but he was running on a little bit at the end, past some horses. Now he's getting significant class relief. Lasix goes on, blinkers go on. I feel like we're going to see a more professional horse this time. And I don't know if he's going to be 15 to 1. I think he's more appealing than that. But he is definitely a horse that I want to use. The other horse that I would want to use prominently in this race is the number 11, Maximum Impact. This is a horse that, well, I don't love the wide post that he has today because he had a wide post last time and that led to problems. His last trip is really worth watching because breaking from post 12, he was extremely wide around both turns. He was ridden by an apprentice that day and just never made any attempt to get this horse even close to the rail, or remotely so, and he was just hung out to dry the entire way. That was a tougher maiden special weight field, and it was a race that was really dominated on the front end, so he never had a chance to close in that spot. He's getting class relief, goes out for a dangerous trainer in Norman Cash, and is getting a big rider switch to John Court this time. So I'm hoping that John Court can save a bit more ground on him, but he's a horse that I think could sneak by at a price and is worth including. So the 3 and the 11 are the horses that I find most interesting from a value standpoint, and it is the kind of race where I feel like if you like a horse at a price, just go with it because there's nobody to be scared of.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them. One thing I wanted to mention about Full On, it's obviously been a long time since Wayne Lucas was a prominent trainer, but when he was well known for popping second time out after horses didn't run very well first time. So that used to be a big stat. It's probably blunted nowadays because he doesn't win very often, but I certainly would keep that in the back of my mind. I just had notes on 2 more horses, well, you did mention one. The one was the 5, Looking for Excitement. He's a horse who I don't want at all in this spot. He basically had everything his own way last time. The pace was slow. He had the lead. He faced a little pressure, but when the fractions are slow, I don't put a lot of stock into that. Didn't run much of a figure, so if it's a horse who's going to take money, I'm not going to use him. As you were going through your prices, I kept waiting for you to say the one that I think actually has a decent shot in here, and you didn't, which isn't surprising in a field like this. And that's the 6-horse Tiger Moon, who's also 15 to 1 on the morning line. He hasn't done a lot of running if you look at his running lines in the past performances, but his speed figures actually stack up just as well as anybody in here, and he's just taking a huge drop in class out of maiden special weights, and not just maiden special weights at small tracks, but at Churchill and Keeneland. So with any life at all he's able to show at this reduced level of competition, he's one that I'd want to have on my tickets as well.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to try to talk you off a horse like that. I definitely gave him a long look. He's got some prior route form against better. He's one that you could certainly use. These maiden races, there's not a whole lot of form, so it's hard to know who's going to work out the right trips. It's hard to know if they're going to change their running styles in their second or third starts. You often do want horses that can get some forward position in these races, and maybe he'll be one of them, but we'll see. I mean, there are some others that could be ridden forwardly. Before we move on from this race, we could spend the entire podcast on one race. One other horse that I do want to just briefly mention is the number 8, La Flecha, who comes off one of the better results achieved in this field, losing by just a length, finishing second at the $30,000 level last time out. Just want to mention, this horse is a half-brother to Adigan, who I want to say was third in the Belmont Stakes. So, I mean, It's possible that this horse just really improved during the mile last time. I know his prior form looks completely uncompetitive and inferior, but he might just be a horse that's really improving with distance. So, look, just another horse that you could throw into the mix. And people that like to hit the all button, this is the kind of race that I know there'd be strong temptation to do so, even in a 12-horse field, because you can make a case for a lot of price horses. Hopefully we don't have to spend quite as much time on the stakes race. Moving on to race 8, the Pippin Stakes, going a mile for the fillies and mares. And Craig, this is one that I think we can narrow down to just 3 or 4 contenders. The favorite on the morning line is the number 1 Coach, going out for Brad Cox. She returned from the layoff last time, winning an optional claimer. Looked good enough doing it as the 3-2 favorite that day. Although, looking through her form, I'm not sure how good she really was as a 3-year-old. In the last race, it doesn't say that she's necessarily taken a step forward as a 4-year-old, so I'm a little skeptical of her if she is indeed the favorite. I might want to look elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, she looked good the last time. I mean, not to the eyes. I mean, I just thought she looked okay, but she won easy enough. Didn't really look in danger through the lane to me, but she only ran a 97 TimeformUS speed figure. She actually regressed off of her better numbers where she had run in the low hundreds as a spring 3-year-old filly last year. So for me, that's not really what you want to see, especially for a short price. I get the people who are going to expect improvement. It's Brad Cox, so we know she's going to take money, but it's just not the kind of horse that I want at a short price. So vertically speaking, I'm definitely going to take her on it and not use her, to be honest.
Yeah, we have a similar view of that. I feel like if you're going to try to narrow things down in any leg of this sequence, this is the one where you probably want to do it. And if you can beat a favorite in narrowing things down, that's even better. So I think Coach is the kind of vulnerable short price that you might want to take a stand against. And Craig, in my opinion, I feel like you'll probably agree with me, the real horse to beat in this race is the number 6, Miss Bigley, and I feel like there's a good chance that she goes off as the favorite. She just has really strong form from out of town, and Phil D'Amato, he's a trainer that can send out winners anywhere. Her last couple of efforts where she finished directly behind horses like Private Mission as time goes by and Obligatory, they're just better than this field.
Yeah, I mean, she's clearly the horse to beat for me. And I know we have co-second choice as one of your favorite things in this race with Josie, but I think she's clearly better than Josie, both speed figure wise, when you look through the competition she's been facing. So I do think Miss Bigley's the horse to beat. Josie, it wouldn't shock me if she won this race, but I think anything near that morning line that she is a big underlay. I would view her as more of a 5 or 6 to 1 type shot. So I would say Miss Bigley's the horse to beat, but I am going to try to beat her. And it's kind of going to go back to very early in the podcast when you were mentioning the stats of Robertino Diodoro, first off the claim, stretching out on dirt routes at Oaklawn Park. And he claimed WW Fitzy last time for, I think it was 62.5. She was actually in that same race that Coach is in. But when I'm looking for a price, when you bet a trainer like this and you're using trainer stats, you just kind of have to take a leap of faith. I know there's a lot of skepticism about what Robertino Diodoro does or doesn't do to improve his horses, and I don't really want to get into that. I'm a bettor. All I know is that he does it a lot, and I'm going to take a shot because I think this horse is actually going to be a price. And in these kind of spots, he does often slip under the radar.
Yeah, we have the same view of this race, so I'm not going to belabor the point too much. I echo your sentiments about Diodoro being dangerous in these races, and yeah, I read off the stats earlier. They're very strong, especially at Oaklawn Park. And I have one more thing to add just about WW Fitzy, is that I know her recent form looks subpar, and at first glance it feels like Diodoro is going to really have to improve her, but her last race where she finished behind Coach is not nearly as bad as it seems. She blew the start that day and frankly got a pretty poor ride after that, just staying inside, trying to squeeze inside of a tiring horse at the top of the stretch. I know she was 4th, beaten almost 6 lengths. She ran a lot better than that result indicates, and she's got prior races from last season that put her right in the mix with horses like Miss Bigley. Actually, she's got a speed figure that's faster than Miss Bigley's recent numbers, so I feel like WW Fitzy is very dangerous in this race, and she's one of just 2 horses that I would use, and I feel like, based on your comments, you have the same strategy. It's just 3 and 6 for me in the stakes.
Yeah, pretty much. And you brought up another point that I had in my notes with WW Fitzy, and it is that she does have those back numbers. And I think that is a big thing if you look through the past performances, which you can do in Formulator, of all the horses that have been claimed and succeeded for Diodoro in these spots. They usually do have some back numbers to run to, and this one certainly does.
Let's move on to the final leg of this sequence. It is a high-level allowance race, or I should say high-pursed allowance race with a purse of $100,000 for horses going the 2-turn mile at Oaklawn. Very competitive field here, Craig. Got another interesting pace situation with quite a bit of speed signed on. A few of these horses exit a common race from December 11th, which was won by Luck of the Draw. That was another race that featured a pretty fast pace that was set by Mia Comet, who rushed up from the outside. So off that performance, no surprise to see Mia Comet shown as the leader on the pace projector, but he could have to work pretty hard to secure the lead once again.
He is, but I'm going to get right to the point. He's the horse I'm going to key on in here. I thought that last race was huge. It was first off the claim. And if you look through the chart of that race, he didn't just duel in fast speed figures, fast pace figures. They were in the 150s earlier in the race. He did it against a horse who was actually the favorite that day, a horse Palace Coupe for Robertino Diodoro. He actually dueled that horse basically into being eased. The horse was eased. So I really liked what I saw. He didn't finish very far back. There are some other speeds in here, but the way he was able to get to the lead from that far outside post that day, I believe he had the 10 hole. He was the 12 horse, but there were a couple scratches. But I was just super impressed by that effort. So I'm going to take the chance that he's the speed of the speed. It is the 1 mile where they used the 16th pole finish for the at Oaklawn Park, so it's a short stretch run, and I'm just going to hope the cutback in distance and the sheer speed this one showed first time out for D. Wayne Lucas is there, and he's going to make or break my day.
Yeah, I really have nothing to add about Mia Comet. I think he's a major player in this race, and he's one of my top picks in here. I echo all of your sentiments about the trip that he had last time. And there's one other thing to note about this horse is he was a visually impressive winner in the mud at Churchill 2-back, so you know he handles a wet track, which he's likely to get by the time this race is run late in the day on Saturday. And also, I remember I had talked about that sequence on the forecast back in December, I believe, when I had Caleb Knight on. And one of the things that I had stuck out to me about this horse when he ran that day at a big price was that he is the only horse that Dwayne Lucas has claimed over the past 5 years. Just something a little bit odd that he's not a claiming trainer, but dipped in for this horse for $50,000 and ran right back with what I thought, and I think you agree, was a career best effort. So I think Mia Comet definitely dangerous as the potential speed of the speed here. He's the one that I want out of that race, Craig. Auto Legend has a bit of a trouble line that day. Traffic and upper stretch had to angle out a little bit and maybe got bumped, but all things considered, I thought Auto the Legend, that trouble notwithstanding, had a pretty good trip up until that point, saving ground. He closed into the fast pace, so I didn't necessarily want him out of that race. A lot of the same goes for Phantom Dance, who made a lot of sense that day, but again, he got a good trip from off the pace and just barely got by Mia Comet at the end, so I want the speed out of that race. The horse that interests me the most and is the other one that I want to use prominently in this race is the number 10 Cool House. Not a horse that I think you're going to get 8-1 on, going out for the very strong Brad Cox stable, but seems like a horse where maybe something went wrong with him last time when he was bet down to 3-5 at Churchill back at the end of May. Just really never lifted a hoof. Wasn't seen for a long time after that, but they're running him back at the high-profile Oaklawn meet. And he had run a pretty nice speed figure when he broke his maiden on Derby Day back on May 1st. A horse that seemed like he really appreciated the mile that day, and a $600,000 son of Nyquist that I feel like might still have a license to be pretty good. So he's the other one that I would want to use prominently.
Yeah, unfortunately for our listeners, we're not too different in this race. He's the other one I like. There was a time when Brad Cox, and it wasn't that long ago, he didn't have the greatest stats off of layoffs. He did a lot better second off the layoff than he did first. But I was surprised when looking at this race to see that he now is a 94 in the Timeform US PPs for runners coming back off a layoff. I did a little digging in Formulator, and he certainly seems to have changed his MO in the past year. So I don't think the layoff's near the concern. There was a time last year when I would have tossed this horse immediately, but for all the reasons you said, I do think the horse has a good shot. He's probably going to get a nice setup. The post is a little tricky from outside, but with all the speed, that tends to spread the horses out, especially if Mia Comet goes as fast as I think he will early.
One other horse that I want to get your take on before we wrap up this sequence is the number 5 Carrillo, who I believe is listed as the morning line favorite going out for Tom Amoss. He kind of has that infamous distinction of probably never living up to his purchase price from early in his career when I think after he broke his debut, he was sold as part of that Paul Pompa dispersal. And I want to say he went at auction for over $800,000 as a potential Derby prospect. Well, those aspirations never really panned out, but he did finally run a good race for the New Connections last time at Churchill Downs. It's just that was going 1.25 miles, and I feel like this is a tougher field. So if he's going to be among the short prices, maybe I don't want him at 3-1, but he's the kind of horse that I could see throwing into the mix if he drifts up to like 6-1.
Yeah, we had exactly the same thoughts in here. I didn't like the big turn back in distance, particularly when looking at his speed figures. They had gotten better as the distances got longer. His last two were at 1.3 miles and 1.25 miles, and they were his two triple-digit speed figures. So I'm not necessarily sure a mile is what he wants, and that 3-1 morning line definitely turned me off on him.
No, Craig, I know we were chatting a little bit offline before we started recording, and you were saying you're probably not going to play this sequence. I know that big, bloated pick 5 tickets are not really your thing or your way of playing the races. It's definitely a ticket where you're going to have to kind of go in with a surgical knife if you want to play it for a reasonable budget to try to carve out which horses you're going to try to lean on and basically cut out as much fat as possible. And if you are doing it that way, using something like the ABC method is a good option. You can use DRF Bets Ticket Maker to do that, and it'll spit out all of the ticket combinations that you have to play for your set of A's, B's, and C's for all 5 of these races. I went through just quickly to try to put something together, and as I selected all my A's, B's, and C's, it came out to a ticket that's nearly $200. So I'm probably not going to play it for that much, but it is one that I'll try to narrow down a little bit once scratches come in. That could change things a little bit, but it is a really tough sequence to get a handle on. It does feel like one, though, that if you hit it, you're going to get paid for your opinions. In the first leg, Craig, I went with Heirloom Kitten and Mr. Dougie Fresh. I did not get too creative there, but the long shot that I wanted to throw in was that number 6 Pasamonte man, who could inject some value if he is successful in that first leg. In the second leg, I would lean on Connie K and my long shot Miss Sassy Attitude. They would either be an A and a B, or maybe potentially 2 A's if I really feel like Miss Sassy Attitude is going to offer the value that I need in this pick 5 type of wager. The others I could use, but they'd be more distant backups like C's. In the 7th race, it just seems totally wide open. I would use as many as I could possibly afford, but the 2 that I would want to lean on most heavily are the 3 Full On and the 11 Maximum Impact. Craig and I, we agreed in the stakes race both using WW Fitzy and Miss Bigley. And the last, I think, again, we were pretty much in agreement with Mia Comet and Cool House being the 2 that I wanted to lean on.
Yeah, we're pretty similar in there. The one horse I noted in the 5th race was Carl G, who hasn't been on dirt in a long time. Has been running again, or at least in the last race, ran really well against 40,000 claimers on the synthetic. So I'm going to be a bit interested in him. That Arkansas-bred Allowance, Unbridled Twister is a horse I'm going to key on along with Dolly Dimple. No argument with your pick, Connie K, in there. I am against heated argument. I just don't think she's a horse who can finish off her races. She doesn't rate for whatever reason, so I don't want any parts of her. The 7th race, if the 13 gets in, that would change things quite a bit. But otherwise, the horses I would lean to would be the 4 Magoo, who I talked about showing that strong early speed against a horse who has come back to turn out to be very, very good, and Tiger Moon, who's taken a big drop in class for this one. And the last two we pretty much agreed on. I might throw in the last race Otto the Legend. Um, I like that he was able to finish, even though he was reasonably close to the pace compared to some of the other closers, and still hold them off. But it would be me a comment for me as the lone A.
Definitely not an easy ticket to put together, or a series of tickets, because this is probably the kind of sequence where you want to play more than one ticket. Not a caveman type of pick five sequence this is. So we'll see if we're successful with some of our opinions, and if we choose the right races to spread or go a little more thinly in. It's definitely one that's going to be tricky to navigate on Saturday at Oaklawn Park, and we'll see what impact the weather has. Craig, always fun to discuss these races with you. I know that we were talking a little bit about maybe having some guests join us in the future for these TimeformUS Forecast, maybe spice up our handicapping discussions a little bit. So we'll put out some information about that on Twitter in coming weeks, but I know we're trying to line up a couple of those for the next week or 2 or 3 weeks from now, even for Pegasus World Cup Day when that comes around. So we'll talk about that in the future. But Craig will certainly be back next week, just the two of us, to talk about these races and recap them from all around the country on the TimeformUS Pacecast.
Yeah, it was really nice to be back. I actually missed doing this show in particular while I was away on vacation. So always good to get back and bounce around some of these races with you.
Everybody, thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.